everyone. Welcome to our webinar series called the Zero Trust Club. This is episode 6. The 5 episodes before this have covered all aspects of Zero Trust, from how to deploy Zero Trust in your environment, what is Zero Trust, product demos, and so forth. And in this episode, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, or AI. My name is Tarun Desikan. I'm the EVP of Cloud Security at SonicWall. And I'm joined today by Bill Mann. Bill is the co-founder and CEO of Inception Cyber. Bill, do you want to just give us a quick intro and then we can jump into the content?
Hey, everybody. I'm Bill Mann. I'm CEO of Inception Cyber. We're a next generation email security firm using AI to solve the problem around email threats.
AI is all the rage, right? You can't go anywhere without bouncing or hearing into something about AI. How do you think about, especially in the realm of enterprise security, how do you define AI? How do you think about what AI is doing for us here?
Yeah, I think, I was listening recently to a TED talk from Eric Schmidt, the previous CEO of Google, and he kind of talked about AI in a kind of an interesting way, which is the way I kind of now think about it. Obviously his ideas, I'm using them as my views now as well. So let's kind of take it from the top, right? So, kind of what is AI? And it means a lot of things to a lot of people, but I think most of the world now knows ChatGPT, right? And that's been our first experience of AI. And we've been able to use ChatGPT and generate content out of it. And it's kind of mind-blowing how great it is, right? In terms of creating content, right? And it uses a generative model, and it's been trained on everything that's been written from year dot, is what they say, right? So that is what AI means to a lot of people at the moment, right? And I'll talk about that in more detail when we talk about security. But that's a kind of a good benchmark in terms of how we think about AI. But AI is changing radically at the moment, right? And if you're covering kind of the news at the moment, everybody's talking about agentic AI, right? Because whereas ChatGPT is kind of a question answer kind of approach, agentic AI has the ability to run tasks and combine different agents together, so you can have workflows. You can create a task to say, look up Tarun's LinkedIn profile, find something about you, generate an email, wait for the email, respond to the email. You can have whole business processes kind of defined with agentic AI. But going back to Eric Schmidt, there's a lot of hype in the industry about AI, obviously, right? And none of us know, if it's true or not, right? And there used to be hypes around SaaS and cloud before and so forth. But his talk was all about the fact that he thinks it's underhyped.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. And he thinks, right, we're going to get to this state, which is called AGI, artificial generative intelligence, where we're really going to have kind of human-like intelligence, right? Where you're going to be able to give AI a task to do, and AI is going to go and think about it for 15 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. Humans do. When we are given a process, we think about it. So that's kind of like, this kind of blows my mind in terms of how things are moving. And when it comes back to security, kind of blows my mind how this can impact what we do in enterprises today, right? And briefly speaking, enterprises have to worry about 2 things now, right? 2 big things, right? And it all relates to zero trust as well, right? One is how an enterprise is going to use these new tools effectively. I mean, how does an employee use ChatGPT? Do you want them to type your proprietary information into the ChatGPT prompt, right? Who's allowed to do it? All those kind of things, right? There's the part of most companies, mid to large companies are trying to use AI to streamline processes and redefine processes, right? So they're training their models. How do you make sure that you're training the model properly? How do you make sure that the model is not hallucinating? So this AI governance and security, which is one part of AI challenges. And then the one I worry about the most, right, is the bad guys,
right?
The AI, and using it to attack the company. And we'll talk more, but at the high level, what we're seeing is all this goodness that we see with AI, which I do believe is goodness, and we've got to move forward and so forth. but the bad guys are going to be able to use it to scale attacks, right? And their attacks are going to be perfect, right? And that's what we're seeing in the industry. So that's how I kind of think about AI.
So before we get into what the bad guys are doing, let's just talk about how an employee might use ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a big company. OpenAI is a big company. Google Gemini, these are big companies. We're kind of used to uploading data into the cloud now. We don't worry so much about email through Google or sharing documents in Google Drive anymore. Why should we be worried about what an employee is putting into ChatGPT?
Oh, it's a big worry, right? So there's a big difference between the two use cases you could describe. When we're using email or Google Drive, at least, and I'm talking 99% of the time, right? Nobody else can see that email, right? It's not that somebody at Google is logging into your Drive account and looking at your emails or your content and so forth. It's a multi-tenanted environment, and there's safety around who can have access to that information. When you type something into ChatGPT, that data is being used to train that model to get smarter and smarter and smarter, right? So that data is in the public now, right? So
is that in the agreement that says, hey, if I type something into a prompt of ChatGPT, that data will be used for training and then later served to somebody else?
Well, don't quote me on the legalese here, because I haven't looked at the legalese, right? But that is the major concern, right? That these models are using that data to get trained on, right? In fact, some people have been able to prompt ChatGPT in the wrong way for it to give you, interesting kind of results as well, right? And that's what's called hallucination. When you train a model with lots of bad data, fake output will come out as well, right? But the point I'm making is, if you're using ChatGPT, you got to be very conscious of the fact that your prompts, right, have to be written in a way so you're not kind of training it on data, right? So make sure that there's no PII data you're sharing, right? If you're talking about something, if I'm writing an email to you, let's say, right, and it's about a SonicWall, maybe I'll write it in a generic way and I won't mention your name, I won't mention your company name, etc., right? And I'll use that content to then generate my response and so forth, right? So the recommendation for most people is use ChatGPT as a tool. Don't just take what they give you and send it out if you're using it for email or content writing and so forth.
So maybe we'll just address, actually, maybe we'll come to it towards the end, because I have some real world examples of in our worldview, customers, we've seen how they're using ChatGPT or ChatGPT like tools, the corporate impact, and then how you could potentially use zero trust security to block it. But we'll come to that a little bit later. Let's switch to the second type of AI you started talking about. So the first one was how we use it ourselves as employees. The second one was how the bad guys are using it. So this is your world. I feel like you've been knee deep in watching the bad guys leverage this. What are some examples of how the threat actors are leveraging AI? What is the impact of some of the things they're doing?
Yeah, so my focus has been around email. And obviously email is the number one threat vector that comes into the organization. And obviously email results in identity compromise attacks. Yeah. And obviously, zero trust is trying to stop that, but somehow people still seem to be able to compromise people's accounts and send emails and so forth, right? So the attacks are happening, right? That's why email security is such a big market and so forth. But the big thing that's changed with email now, and it started about 18 months ago, is threat actors started using these same tools themselves, right? And to generate sophisticated attacks. So we're seeing at the high level, what we're seeing is attacks are being scaled up much more. They're way more precise, and the variations of attacks have exploded as well. And let me explain what I mean by that. When I say about scaling attacks, in the past, before these tools existed, threat actors used to spend a lot of time researching a company. And they need to do kind of, look at lots of data sets. They have to examine LinkedIn themselves, et cetera, et cetera. If they, let's say, wanted to do a employee, a payroll scam of some sort, they had to find somebody who works in the organization and so forth. Now there's tools like Fraud GPT. It's in the dark web.
Wait, Fraud GPT. I can't say I've heard of this one. Yeah.
Fraud GPT. It's in the dark web. It's a subscription-based service. believe it
Oh,
or not.
wow. Is it
Right?
run by OpenAI as well?
No,
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 no.
not run by OpenAI or anybody like that, but it's run. It's in the dark web, and it's a service kind of like ChatGPT, but the bad guys are using it, and you can use it to generate phishing attacks, right? Scams and so forth, right? And the scary thing is, it's got no guardrails, right? At least ChatGPT has guardrails. I mean, when you prompt ChatGPT with something that is outside of the boundaries, it won't respond back. These things don't have guardrails, right? So being purpose-be built for the bad guys. And what they can use them for is obviously scaling attacks. And I said, a lot of precision, because these tools can go into existing databases and look for data and so forth. And when I talk about variations of attacks, what I mean by that is, let's take, everybody knows what QR codes are, right?
Okay.
Now you can generate a unique QR code for everybody in the organization. Yeah. So, all these previous defense technologies we had, which is like, hey, look for this particular QR code. That's it. You found it. You blocked the attack. Well, what happens is everybody gets a unique one, right? So that's what's happening with AI. And, we're seeing, I mean, there was this is timely. I was looking online this morning. There's an article that you can probably send to the viewers, from CSO online, that came out this morning. It's called what's it called again? It's called AI gives superpowers to BEC attacks. BEC, business email compromise, right?
Yeah.
These are these types of email attacks where it's very like low key, right? It's like, hey Tarun, how you doing? Wanted to connect up with you. We spoke a couple of days on LinkedIn. No attachments, no phishing link. It's what we call initial alert to get a connection going, right? And these are the ones that then follow up, right, with an attack, right? And the language is perfect, as we know, right, with ChatGPT. So all this, and I'm not saying we shouldn't train employees. I'm not saying that, but the training we've given to employees at the moment has been, look at the headers, look at the sentence, look for spelling mistakes. Those don't exist anymore. The language in the emails is perfectly grammatically perfect. There's no spelling mistakes. There's, like, we in deployments are seeing, trusted brands being exploited, right? So on our website, we talk about a DocuSign attack, right? Where, an employee gets an attack. It's totally perfect DocuSign email. Yeah. And when they click on the link, it takes them to a capture page. So the user has to authenticate, define that, they need to show that they're a human, not a robot. And only then that the exploitation happens. And these attacks are now smart enough that if a researcher is trying this out, it doesn't work the same way.
I see. As an end user.
As an end user. So it's amazing what is happening out there now. And I'm not trying to scare the audience, right? But it's kind of logical, right? I mean, we've all got these great tools now, like ChatGPT, and let's face it, right? When 7 billion people have access to ChatGPT, you kind of know that 18 months ago, the bad guys already knew about it, right? And they're tooling themselves up. And what we're seeing is these existing tools that everybody has deployed in the enterprise are just not going to be able to protect the organization, right?
How are the bad guys targeting who to use with these new tools that they have? Are they just targeting the big firms with the big dollars? Are they targeting small businesses?
Well, you know what? What's interesting is they're going across the board now. It used to be that they were targeting large organizations in the past, right? Because obviously large organizations have a lot of money that can provide and so forth, right? But they're going after the smaller organizations as well, right? And because there's enough kind of bandwidth there with the new technology for them to go across the board. And the other thing we're finding is within organizations, it used to be the fact that they were only attacking kind of executives or important within the organization. Now they're going across to customer success, customer support, mainline kind of folks, right? like in the hospitality industry, you might get an attack on customer support, which says, hey, I stayed in this room, and the room was really bad. Here's a link to all the photos. It was not clean, blah, 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 blah. If you're a person who works at a hotel, you're going to respond to it really fast. It's your job, right?
Yes.
Customer success. And so they're targeting that.
But that link to the photos will take you to a page that might download some malware onto your device or something like that.
Exactly, but it's way smarter now, right? It might take a page which needs to be authenticated. It might be under a capture, right? So, they're not doing the obvious things anymore, right? Because the obvious things have already been solved for, right? I mean, so when we created Inception Cyber, we created it knowing that AI was going to be the big thing, right? So what we're seeing in our deployments is, 1 in 50 employees is being attacked by an evasive threat, right? Mm-hmm. Even though those same companies have got existing tools in place, right? And so that either means that the existing tools are not that good, right? Either that, or it means that the bad guys are just become so much smarter now, right? That the existing tools just can't keep up with, the detection mechanisms and so forth, right? And I'll give you a quick example, right? When you take a BEC attack, the current kind of technologies looks at the words, phrases and keywords and so forth. But as we know, right, AI is so smart now, they can write something which is perfectly polished, right? So the current technologies can't understand what that text means, if it's good or bad. We use AI ourselves now, and we're using large language models, by the way, ourselves as well. And we're able to look at that text and understand the meaning and purpose of that email. We call it intent-based, right? So kind of like the way you and I would read something and like, you know what, I think there's something fishy here. Right?
And then you're trying to predict behavior based on the intent of the email. Hey, this is going to be a malicious exchange.
Yes, we're predicting well, we don't use the word predict, but you are deducing the intent of that email, right? We're saying if it's good versus bad, right? And we use a lot of other information that's available to us, right? But that's what we're doing. And kind of going back to zero trust for a second, because we also see a lot of compromised account attacks as happening as well, where if you're internally within an organization, both of us are working for the same organization, I might get an email from you, and let's not worry about how the bad guys sent the email with your email address. Let's not worry about that for the moment. That's kind of like zero trust problems to solve, right? But then we look at the words in that email to say, hold on, you know what? This has got bad intent.
Yeah.
Right? And then that's how we're able to flag those kind of attacks as well, because attacks are happening within the organizations as well. And because the bad guys typically try to have a BEC attack, try to steal credentials, then come into the organizations with those credentials. Somehow, MFA doesn't work for some reason, right? But it get into the organization, and then they infiltrate the organization by sending emails between people and so forth.
Do you remember this movie in 2002 called Minority Report?
Yeah.
Tom Cruise. I mean, this seems like we're getting into something that these guys predicted 20 years ago, where the AI is used to predict. Not in that case, it was some hyper intelligent human beings, but you're trying to predict something that hasn't happened yet based on patterns you're seeing in communications, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's that's science fiction, but what's happening right as a company is we've trained our model on how threat actors compose emails, and we've used 10 years of data to train our model on how threat actors, let's say, do a payroll scam. Yeah. And having trained that model, we've also trained our model on the variations of those attacks, right? So what I'm saying is, if I said to you, hey, we're going to have this webinar at 10 o'clock, right? That could be one way I could communicate to you. Another way could be, hey, Tarun, or dear Tarun, I see that we've got a webinar at 10 o'clock. They mean the same thing, right? They've got totally different words, right? They've got the same intent, right? So, and that's the cool thing about large language models. We can create variations of that. So, but to answer your question, what we've done is we've also trained our model on how bad actors create these. right?
Okay.
Which is very different from looking at behavior of users and employees, because we now believe, and this is now kind of cited a couple of weeks ago with all the news that's happening in the market. Agentic's coming out now, and you look at speeches from Microsoft about Copilot. Those things are going to be able to read your emails, respond to your emails, right?
Yeah.
Right? So you're going to have machines writing and responding to emails, right? So this focus on human behavior kind of is going to be less important moving forward, right? So yeah, I don't want to scare the audience, but the thing is, things are happening, right? And it shouldn't be a surprise that the advancements we're making with AI is going to be improving productivity, and we're going to be able to do cool things internally and in all of our jobs. But the bad guys are going to be able to restate kind of the threat vectors kind of coming into the organization as well.
So let's touch on one topic before we jump into how organizations can protect themselves, and which is how much of this is hype and how much of this is snake oil. The specific one I'm really interested in is I've been reading all these reports on criminal risk prediction. So which is about in the last 5-10 years, this is for physical incarceration, jails, juvenile detention centers. There were a whole host of AI products that said, hey, I can predict the likelihood of a youth becoming a criminal, or I can predict the likelihood of a criminal in jail becoming a recidivist, whatever, of being able to come back to jail. And so over 10 years, a lot of criminal justice systems actually deployed these AI tools. Now the jury is out. Most of that was nonsense. Most of it didn't work. Most of it, the false positives were so high that by and large in the physical criminal justice system, they've thrown all these tools out. Or most people are recommending, hey, you can't use these tools. Too much of the training is done on existing patterns. And so, you're just using the existing patterns. You're not catching all the new patterns. So how much of this in AI, in the world of AI, especially in the world of cyber AI, is hype? How much of it do you think is snake oil? How can we help the audience kind of distinguish?
Well, I think the big thing to distinguish, number one, is anything that this is kind of like my opinion. Anything that was kind of built prior to kind of mid 2023 legacy.
Okay.
It's legacy, right? From an AI definition point of view, it's legacy, right? Because and in Silicon Valley, we kind of think about the world as kind of pre-gen AI and post-gen AI, right? Because the what you can do with AI has fundamentally changed, right? I mean, if you go back 3-4 years ago, and the examples you're citing, they were using natural language processing, ML, yes, and so forth, right? That's been around forever, right? I mean, I did my university, my final course in Lisp, right, which is, a language for natural language processing. That is nothing like what we have today, right? So you almost have to kind of delete everything that has been said or done prior, because the technology stack has fundamentally changed, right? And it's changing so fast. That's why there's so much movement in the industry around re-engineering stacks and so forth, right? In my little world of email security, that's why email security is being reinvented now, because of these new tools that we've got. We never had the ability before to understand a piece of text the way we have at the moment, right? I mean, that is so powerful, and that's the key difference, right? So yeah, of course there's hype, right? There's hype with everything, right? I mean, you asked me, before this meeting, Bill, has there been a major attack, like the Target attack, right?
And for the audience who doesn't know, in about 2013, 2014 timeframe, the retailer Target got attacked in a very specific manner. The Target had an HVAC company, someone who maintained their heating and cleaning supplies, and essentially the bad guys got into the HVAC system. And then from the HVAC system, because the network wasn't segmented, they were able to get into the point of sale system. And from the point of sale system, they exfiltrated about 15 million credit cards and debit cards. And at that time, it was the biggest breach of its kind, and kind of highlighted that just because it's your private network doesn't mean it's safe. So my question to Bill was, hey, that was really eye-opening. It kind of set off the zero trust movement in many ways. the fact that such a major retailer could have such a sophisticated attack inside their own network kind of motivated zero trust security for many organizations. I was wondering if AI had had a similar kind of game-changing attack and impact.
Yeah. Well, the quick answer is not at the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more nuanced answer is, even if you take that target attack, it probably started with an email, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, and because a lot of attacks actually start with email first, right? And they infiltrate an organization. If you look at ransomware attacks, which are big, right? How do they initially start with an email? But anyway, there hasn't been a kind of a major attack, right? But everything seems to be pointing in that direction, right? Again, going back to this CSO Online article, and I'd pick on that one only because it came out literally 2 days ago, right? They talk about a company in the UK which signed over $25 million because there was a BEC attack which came in to set up a meeting. And then this particular scenario, they used a fake video, right? And fake audio, right? So it was a complex attack, right? And it was successful. Now, when I talk about AI, I've been talking about email, obviously, right? Because that's my kind of focus area. But the other one is audio and the other one is video, right? I'm sure we've all seen on YouTube fake videos and so forth. So that's the other thing that's happening.
Like deep fakes. They call them deep fakes.
Yeah, well, that's a deep fake for news. But let's say there was a deep fake video of you. Let's say, I don't know, you might be an AI, right? So certainly, and voice is already happening. I mean, we already know there's all these great voice tools out there for marketeers to use, where I can say probably 1 minute of, I can read a paragraph for 1 minute, and then it can use my tone and speech to generate, speeches and so forth, right? And that's been used to do phone attacks by AI as well, right? So anyway, to answer your comment, there hasn't been the big target kind of moment for us, right? But and we all obviously don't want that to happen as well, right? So we need to build better defenses for organizations, right? And that's what we're in the business of.
Awesome. So maybe we can switch tack. Actually, maybe let's answer one question. Actually, we have a couple. Okay, let's answer one on, hey, Bill, if AGI takes over the world, do we need to even bother protecting anything?
Of course we do. Of course we do, right? I mean, I don't know the answers to any of these kind of questions, but look, I'm a big science fiction fan, right? So like a lot of people who are into science fiction, I have kind of perspectives on things, right? But I just think that we're just like when the initial factories were opened, right, in the in the 16th century, right, in the weaving and factories, right? We have to embrace this stuff. We can't kind of push it aside. We just have to be careful with how this thing's going to be implemented and so forth, right? But the technology is definitely moving in a direction at the moment, right? And it's moving extremely fast, right? And maybe it'll be slower than what we thought, right? I mean, I used to think that the whole planet would have electric vehicles by 2030. Obviously not going to be the case. It's going to take probably another 10, 15 years, right? So, but things are definitely moving in that direction at the moment.
Right. So on another vein, maybe I can answer this one, is I just want to block all my employees from doing any AI LLM stuff. I mean, that seems like a little excessive. I feel like tools like ChatGPT are incredibly useful for productivity, but I understand there are security concerns. There are organizations always have an acceptable use policy, typically for internet access. Hey, you can't go to a gambling website, you can't have a pornography website. And so most network security products, SonicWall CSC included, now have a category called LLMs. So you can block the entire category of LLMs if you're really paranoid, or you can go block specific applications that you think are, or you could block the category and allow specific applications that your organization supports. That might be one way. So you could, and in SonicWall Secure Internet Access, you have that capability. You can block all LLMs and then maybe allow ChatGPT and Gemini to go. I think the thing you probably have to do more is the more mundane aspect of educating your employees, because the tools are moving so quickly. AI is going to be built into Microsoft. AI is going to be built into Google. you can't block Microsoft and Google. So as much as you can put these kind of broad, hey, block all LLMs in your organization, I think training the employees is, you want to maybe do that for some acceptable use policy, but there's no substitute for training your employees.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I want to jump into how we defend against AI, but I just want to bring up one more use case, which is there are all these tools that allow you to auto compose emails and even send them. It's become all the rage, especially because pretty much all of us are suffering from email overload. Hey, wouldn't it be nice if you click on this one button and an AI reads all your emails, composes a response, and you can just skim and hit send, 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 send. And I don't know, Bill, if you've seen that, use these tools, what your thoughts are on those?
Well, I have not personally used these tools, but my team has used these tools, and it's definitely happening. It's definitely happening a lot in marketing automation and sales automation. It's a very common, scenario where somebody sends an email saying, "Hey, I'm looking for this kind of information," and these tools. Actually, I was setting one up a couple of days ago, right, and going through the kind of the setup guide. But yeah, you can put certain keywords in there and they'll generate a response and so forth, right? So it's happening already. It's going to happen in a bigger way, right? And they're becoming way more smarter as well. There's AI versions of these tools because there's two generations of these tools. There's ones which are kind of like more rule-based, right? Which have been around for 18 months or so, right? But the ones which are way smarter, which are using large language models themselves, can they can deduce what they want to, what the kind of the rules are going to be themselves, right? So for me, the way I think about it is, one, it's happening, and most companies probably will have to adopt these kind of tools because you become much more productive by definition. I mean, you've got to be able to get the boring tasks away from you. Now, what it means for me as a company that's want to defend the organization against attacks is, it means that there's less personalized emails going out from an organization. They're more standardized boilerplate kind of emails. So any kind of behavioral kind of analysis that you might have done in the past is not going to be important anymore, right? And you've got to be using different ways to defend the organization. And our answer to that is to look at the way threat actors compose emails, right? Versus looking at, my emails and who am I normally sending emails to, right? Because it's a non-starter, right? And you asked me earlier on about how the threat landscape's changing, but a lot of the tools in the industry at the moment are focused on the executives and a small set of people that are being attacked. Now everybody's attacking everybody, right? So, you can't do a behavioral profile of everybody in an organization, right? It's just too much to do, right? So that's why the tools have to change to models like what we've got.
Awesome. So let's move into that then. Let's talk about how I'm a small business. I have about 50 employees. Okay, I recognize AI as a threat. What are some things I should be doing to protect myself? Maybe you start from your side, and then I'll talk a little bit about the zero trust side that you should be doing.
Well, I think my company's obviously very focused on AI, on email security, and email is the number one threat vector. So I would say, implement a tool like Inception Cyber, right? I'm here, right? But so inceptioncyber.com, reach out to me. But seriously speaking, you need to implement a email security solution for your organization, and that has to be capable of stopping, all types of threats, be it malicious attachments, phishing attacks, and BEC attacks, identity compromise attacks, and look for tools which are using native AI kind of platforms now, right? And AI, everybody's gonna say AI. It's like it's everybody's branding AI. But ask more kind of detailed questions about the kind of the underlying technology behind it, because there's a big difference between the vendors out there in terms of accuracy and so forth, right? And detection capabilities. And we've been able to prove we can detect far better than anybody else in the industry at the moment, because our fundamental detection mechanisms are different.
And I'm going to suggest that folks establish basic controls. See, AI is sophisticated and it's growing in sophistication, but many of the attacks just leverage the fact that the basic controls are not there. I'll give you a simple example of a basic control. AI can probably go figure out your password just by trying all combinations of your birthday, children's names, wives' names. So you better have some multi-factor authentication. And even if you have both of those, AI can probably figure out how to bypass that with the email phishing attack, in which case you lock down access to your sensitive information to trusted devices. And so these are basic controls. It's what the zero trust philosophy is. And if you have the basic controls, it makes the job a little bit harder for the attacker. So basic controls include multi-factor authentication, device posturing, device trust, least privilege access. If I don't need access to Salesforce, don't give me access to Salesforce. Simple basic controls will actually make the hacker's job harder. And here's the one thing: when you're doing a scale attack, if one guy is a little harder to attack, you're going to probably just skip it. You're not going to go back and try to penetrate that organization. You're just going to move on to the next organization that's a little easier to attack. And so I really think the number one thing people can do today to protect against AI attacks is get the basics down pat. You have to get the basics down. Then you can add on more sophisticated email security. You might want something more dedicated to phishing and training specific AI related threats if you have the time and the bandwidth. But that would be the general advice we would have for the audience.
Yeah, and just to add, and I agree with everything you've said. Email security is like a basic control, right? Now,
Right.
One of the most basic things that organizations need to do is email security. So most organizations are using a G Suite or Office 365. Enable the security there; it's there already for free, right? And now those security, the security that's embedded within Microsoft and Google will not be able to stop the types of attacks I'm talking about. I mean, we are an add-on to those products, right? So they're not going to be able, but by not switching them off, you're even leaving yourself open to attacks, right? So that's already there. So enabling that is very important for you as an organization. That's free as well as part of your license.
So we've been all doom and gloom, Bill. Like, how about we end on a positive note? So what is some cool thing that AI has helped you accomplish in the last few days, weeks, months that you perhaps wouldn't have been able to accomplish before that?
Well, you know what? I'm using AI a lot myself, right? I mean, we're a small company like most startups, right? And I'm just kind of flabbergasted that I can do so much more as an individual than if I compare myself to a year ago at my previous company, right?
Mm-hmm.
The most exciting thing I actually was we needed to do something on our website, and I was using vibe coding to help me code it. And I'm not a coder, so I haven't coded. I mean, I haven't coded for, I don't know, for a long time, right? So, and I don't know how to do this, but the fact that I could just kind of like ask, AI, write me some code to do this. This is what I kind of want to do, and it came up with something, and then I was going to be able to go back and forth and fix it and so forth. That was really exciting. And it just showed me the power of what this is going to allow us to do, right? It's going to allow so many people to accomplish so much because they don't want to go into the details of how some of this stuff works, right? Because I'm not interested in that. I just wanted the outcome out of it, right? And so on our website, in our Why Inception page, there's a video there.
Of vibe coding.
No, it's not about vibe coding, but that is the end result of the work that I was doing. Right.
That's awesome.
And because we wanted to, do things on a budget, and that's how we started. So I actually used vibe coding to kind of create a mock-up of that myself, right?
Wonderful. All right. On that note, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Bill, for spending the time with us. And if you have questions on email security and how AI can help, please reach out to Bill at Inception Cyber. For anything Zero Trust and SonicWall, CSC, I'm your host, Tarun at SonicWall. Look forward to hearing from you guys. Thank you.